So as you can imagine, this first panel is looking at Colorado River issues, both from the state and tribal perspective. If you read the newspapers, there's been a lot going on in that venue of late. And these three are going to update us on what they know and what they can tell us on how those things are going. So we have three panelists. First, Lorelei Cloud, Vice Chair for Southern Ute Tribal Council, and also serves as Southwest Director on the Colorado Water Conservation Board. On the far end, we've got Becky Mitchell, who is Colorado's Commissioner on the Upper Colorado River Commission, used to serve as the Director for Colorado Water Conservation Board. Sitting in the middle, Estevan López is New Mexico's Commissioner for the Upper Colorado River Commissioner and former Commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation. So, Vice Chair Lorelei.
Do today, everyone. Welcome to Ute Country. I am very grateful to be here this morning. But, I want to thank Steve and the Southwest Water Conservation District for asking me to be part of this panel today. But I do want to make a correction to Steve. We are not in Ignacio, Colorado. We are on the Southern Ute Reservation. If you drive down the road a little bit further, you will be in Ignacio. So. But I also want to, again, the modern narrative is to do a land acknowledgement, and that's why I say welcome to Ute Country, because the history that is told today doesn't include Native American history. And so it's important to understand where you are at. And so acknowledging that we are on Ute land is very important today to do this. And so let me go into, so I did present a PowerPoint slide today. So to understand where we are, we need to take a step back into history. And so I want to give you a little bit of a history lesson on the Ute people. The Ute people are the oldest continuous inhabitants of what now is the state of Colorado. When we say Nuchu or Nooch, that means it's actually translated into English as the people. So we are the people of this land. So this map shows our historical lands of the area. So you can see that we encompassed much of the state of Colorado, a large portion of Utah, New Mexico, and there's a portion in Arizona as well too. So if you were to overlay this map with the Colorado River Basin, you would see that the Ute people are the upper basin. And so as we move forward, it's important to understand that our history is very much tied to this area. Our creation story starts in the Rocky Mountain area. So when we talk about our creation story, it goes, I'm just going to give you a highlight of the story because I want to spend more time on some of the important, the current issues that we're dealing with right now. So our creation story, we refer to creator as Sinaloa. And Sinaloa gave a bag of sticks to Coyote, and he told him to place these sticks in a certain place in the mountains, in the valleys. And the Coyote was so curious, he said he could do this, but he was so curious he couldn't help himself. As soon as he got over the first hill out of sight from the creator, he opened the bag, and all of these people ran out, and they were all speaking different languages, and he knew he messed up. So he's trying to grab all these individuals, these sticks, and put them back in the bag, and he couldn't do it. But so the ones that he could capture and that were still left in the bag, he went ahead and on his task and placed them in the mountains. And those were the Ute people. And so when he went back to Creator, Creator had asked him if he finished his task, and he said yes. But Creator had already knew what he had done. And so he told them, all those individuals, all the people that had ran out, they will always be at war with the Ute people. But the Ute people will always be the strong people. They will always be valiant of heart. And they will always be known as the Ute people, the Shiny Mountain people. So we've always been in the Rocky Mountain areas, and we will continue to remain within the Rocky Mountain area. We don't have a migration story compared to other tribes. And when other tribes do have different histories, they do have different traditions, different cultures. So I suggest that you learn about the indigenous people that are in your areas, because they are probably going to be a little bit different from the Ute people here. We follow what we call like a band structure within the Ute people. There was about 12 to 14 bands of Utes at one time that encompassed the area that I had showed you earlier. We believe in protecting our natural resources because Creator gave us this earth for us to take care of, to steward it, is what it's now known as. So we were always connected to the land. We made sure that there was reciprocity back to nature. We ensured that nature always took care of us. And so we were very nomadic, and so we would travel around the area through the seasons, and that gave the time for our nature to rejuvenate itself once we moved off of it. And so it gave nature an opportunity to regrow and for the animals to roam in those areas. So there was always a balance between the Ute people and nature. And as we continue to move through the area, it provided a lot of sustenance for our people. We gathered in different areas, and like I said, there was 12 bands of Utes that roamed that area. Currently, there is only 6 bands of Utes that remained. Oops, keep hitting the wrong button, sorry. So pre-contact with the Europeans began with the Spanish as they moved north from the New Mexico area. Utes were captured and sent down to the Santa Fe area. And as the Utes were being captured, they also escaped, and they took the horses from the Spaniards. So the Ute people were the first indigenous people to have horses. And that's why you see the horses outside when you first came into the casino, and those are what met you coming into the casino, because we were the first tribe to have horses. And it's something that we're very proud of as well, too, in our history. But in the 1800s, that dramatically changed as the West was being settled and land and gold and silver was being discovered. And so we were pushed out into smaller sections of the area. And it's also important to understand we didn't believe in land ownership. This is a foreign concept to us. Like I said earlier, this land was given to us to take care of, and so it was for us to share. There was no land ownership. We didn't own the resources. We took care of them for Creator. So in 1873, the Bruna Agreement was passed, and we had to cede part of our reservation. We started out, the first reservation that was created for us had about 15 million acres in the western slope. And then after the Bruna Agreement, we had to cede 3.7 million acres of land. And then of course, you can see that the land became smaller and smaller for us to live on. And so that reciprocity for us to give back to nature started to dwindle. We were confined onto different areas instead of being able to roam. So the conservation to our area became less and less. And some of our culture or our traditions of gathering also was removed from us. And so this is what our lands look like now. Much different than before. And we, like I said, there was about 12 to 14 bands of Utes left. The Southern Ute people, we are made up of the Mowach and Kapota bands of Utes. The Ute Mountain, they are the Weemanooch bands. And in the Ute tribe in Utah, they are the Uncompahgre, Uinta, and the White River bands of Utes. And so we were separated into 3 different areas, and at that time, it was really hard on our people because, again, we were so connected to the land. That is where most of our activities took place within the larger area of the state. And so, again, this is where we're at today. My reservation spans about 110 miles long, 15 miles wide. We have our borders with the state of New Mexico, our sister tribe, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, and the Hickory Apache Nation. We also have a checkerboard land status within our reservation, and I'll go into that a little bit later because that does affect how we move forward with the water and the things that we do. So I'm gonna give you an updated history of who we are today, because who we are today also is really important as we move forward into the water negotiations. My tribe is governed by a tribal council. We have 3 entities within the tribe. We have what we call the Permanent Fund, And the permanent fund is our government structure. We house all of the services for our people within that organization. We have our growth fund, which is our business arm of the tribe. We houses most of our investments. We have energy companies and real estate within that, and also with private equity. We have operations within 14 different states, including the Gulf of Mexico. And because we have done so well for ourselves, we have a AAA credit rating. I don't know if most of you know what that means, but we have a better credit rating than the United States government. Thank you. What's even more impressive is we've had this status since 2001, and we continue to have this status today. So most of our governmental enterprises, also we have the Southern Ute Casino Resort, which you are currently in. I suggest you leave some money out there on the gambling floor.
I did.
We also offer fine dining. We have a bowling alley, and we also have this event center for the different events that happen here. And we are the largest employer in La Plata County. We employ over 1,000 individuals. One other aspect that is not well known about our tribe that we are also very proud of is that we contribute to our county. We provide infrastructure. We donated the land for the hospital in the Three Springs area. And we've also provided different services like technological advances for not just tribal members, but for our entire community. So we do a lot for our community, and we've developed a good relationship with the La Plata County Commissioners, which we are very proud of as well, too. Let's see, what else have we done? One other big project that we are currently doing right now is our broadband project. This is major because most tribes in the United States, I don't know if you know, but we are very behind the times, and so we don't have access to broadband. And so this is a big project that we're doing right now, but because we have a checkerboard land status, we're also offering this, providing broadband not just to tribal members, but to our entire area, our entire community. So over 1,000 individuals will have access to broadband because of our project. My tribe is also very unique because we have 7 rivers that flow through our reservation. Water is very important. It's critical to the way our way of life. We know and we understand that water is alive. We use our water in our prayers. We use our water in ceremonies. So it's something that Creator gave to us, and we want to make sure that it's protected. Again, we believe it's alive. It's a living being. It has a spirit just the way that we do, that humans do. And so protecting that spirit is very, very important for us as we go forward in our water negotiations, because we want to make sure that water is there for not just for us, but for our future generations as well too. And we also want to make sure that that spirit of the water is healthy and it's vibrant, because that nourishes our bodies. But even though we have 7 rivers, most of our rivers look this way, and this is because of the drought conditions that we experience. Drought just doesn't end at the reservation boundaries. We experience drought no matter where we are in this area, and tribal nations are no different in experiencing those types of conditions. But I do want to also highlight that my tribe's water rights are quantified pursuant to a congressionally approved water settlement in 1988, and it was amended in 2000, so really not that long ago. And we worked very tirelessly to get that water settlement. And like I stated earlier, we're fighting tirelessly because we want to ensure that our future generations have the water. And it's because of our ancestors fighting so hard for what they gave up. You know, they gave up their lives for us to be here today. And so we're going to continue doing that for our future generations and ensure that they have what they need to thrive. We are very fortunate to have our water settled, but we're still facing issues such as drought, our infrastructure issues. We have land status issues. We have access issues. We also have inclusion issues, which we're going to talk about here in more in-depth conversations. Again, drought is very we experience the drought conditions very harshly in our area. We have for such a long time. But it's not just the drought, it's also our infrastructure problems. We have what is called the Pine River Irrigation Project. This is a federal project, so the infrastructure belongs to the federal government. It was put into place in the 1800s. The last time this infrastructure, as you can tell, was maintained in the 1960s. Can you imagine the last time any of one of your projects in your ditches were ever maintained? You're going to maintain those every year, but the federal government has failed their trust responsibility by not maintaining this infrastructure, and so this is what we deal with every day. Yet our tribal members and non-tribal members pay their O&M fees every single year for the water that they never received, and this has been going on again since the 1960s. So there's over 400 tribal members and non-tribal members that rely on this system to get their water every year. And again, they're not receiving it. This infrastructure is 175 miles long within our reservation boundaries, again, this small strip of land. And there's about 2,100 structures that come off of this, so there's about that many water users or ditch systems that come off of this system. And it's failed so much. It's been really harsh on all of our people to be able to rely on the water and for their animals as well too. The checkerboard land status really affects this project as well as other things that we deal with, because within my reservation boundaries, I have tribal land, I have tribal trust, I have tribal assignment, I have 2 counties, I have a national monument, I have U.S. forestry. I have fee land, so it's private land. So all of these different land statuses are within this small piece of land. And so if we were even to try and increase or change or build something new, we would have to go through every single one of these different land status and get the permission, get right-of-ways, whatever that may be, to create something new. And that could take years. Versus any one of you, if you were all wanting to do something or create a different ditch on your area or a road, it's not going to take you that long, but it's going to take up to 2 years or maybe longer for us to do something like that. So on this ditch system, only about 15% of it is usable. And so can you imagine that for any one of your water systems if you were having to deal with this? And so we want to make sure that the federal government upholds their trust responsibility and fixes their own system. If the situation was reversed and we owned the system on federal land, they would make sure that we came correct and that we fixed our own system. But that's not the case now that it's reversed. We've done a lot of some of the repairs ourselves. Again, this is a federal project, but we're having to spend our own money on someone else's infrastructure. And some of that funding it's going to talk back in 2020, I think, is the last time this infrastructure was priced out so we knew how much money we needed to spend on it. And that time it was about $60 million to fix this structure. Now it's estimated to be over $170 million to fix this infrastructure because it's taken so long for anybody to come out and look at their infrastructure. So historically, tribes, again, have been left out of the conversations when it comes to water. So this is just a short timeline. There's other events that have happened within this, but I have a short time frame. So as we look through the history, we know that tribes have been left out of the conversations. My tribe was established in 1868, according to the Winters Doctrine. Tribal water rights for my reservation goes back to the date in which the reservation was created. So we have one of the oldest water rights within our area. So we have the most senior water rights, and those go back to 1868. In 1908, there was a Supreme Court case versus Winters versus Winters versus United States. This court case basically states that when reservations were created, that it was implied that water was also part of the reservation. So that is why we have an 1868 priority date. And of course, we know about the 1922 Colorado River Compact. Another important date is 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act. So this act basically says that in 1924, the indigenous people of this land finally became citizens of the United States. This act was signed on June 2nd, 1924. So we haven't hit 100 years quite yet of us being citizens on our own land. To give this more of a context, the first Winter Olympics happened in January of 1924, before we ever became citizens of this country. So again, in 1988, we had our water rights settlement for the two Colorado Ute tribes. Again, the amendments in 2000. The other important item that is not on here is in 2022, tribes had our very first meeting with the Department of Interior Secretary, or Secretary of the Department of Interior in person. The first time we've ever had a meeting with her, or anybody, as the tribes. And so it took almost, again, 100 years later for tribes to be even a part of those conversations. I do have to say that meeting didn't go as well as we had hoped, but we did have a meeting. Our water rights settlement also in 2000 also affected our water in Lake Nighthorse. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but that is another controversial item that is still in the news today. And so we're going to continue fighting for our water and protecting our water in Lake Nighthorse. Let's see. So as we go forward into the current situation with the Colorado River, again, my reservation, we lie within the San Juan River Basin, or we're off of the tributary of the San Juan River. So all of our rivers that flow through our 7 rivers all flow back into the San Juan and eventually into Lake Powell, and of course down to the lower basin. We haven't been able to develop our water, and we plan to fully develop our water in the upper basin. So that means that those individuals that have been relying on our undeveloped, settled water, that eventually they're not going to have that water to use any longer, because we are going to be using our water. And we know that the only way to protect our water is to develop our water. And so we plan on doing this in a meaningful way. We want to be able to make sure that our membership benefits. We are capable of making the decisions for our people and understand how we can protect our water and the benefits that our people need from that water. In addition, we're making advances engaging with the Upper Colorado River Commission, and we want to ensure that we're included in the post-2026 negotiations as they're being developed. And as we know, both the Mountain Ute Tribe and the Southern Ute Tribe and the upper tribes and the other tribes in the Upper Basin, we will be signing an MOU with the Upper Colorado River Commission next month. We've all agreed that this is the way for us to be included, but this is only a MOU, a memo of understanding. It's not giving us a seat at the table. It's giving us an opportunity that can't be taken away for us to have negotiations with our states in the Upper Basin. We know that it's important for the Upper Basin to stand together, and that we are seen as a collective, that each one of the states, or I guess I should say each one of the sovereigns in the Upper Basin are standing together. And so it's going to be the states and the 6 tribes. There's only 6 tribes in the Upper Basin. There's 30 tribes within the Colorado River Basin. And so when you see there's only 6 tribes in the Upper Basin, most of those tribes are in the Lower Basin. But it's important, again, for our 6 tribes in the Upper Basin to stand together with our states, making those statements to ensure that tribes are included in those conversations. Ultimately, what we want is for tribes to have a vote to have an actual seat at the table, and so that's something that we will be continuing to working towards. As we look forward to we're looking forward to those negotiations, we want to. I just want to say that, you know, as we know that the upper basin and the lower basin submitted proposals, but there's not very good language or hard language saying that tribes are going to be included. And so my tribe and 16 other tribes have also submitted a document to the Bureau of Reclamation saying that we want to make sure that tribes are included in those conversations, that we, in our letter to the Bureau of Reclamation, we set a set of common tribal principles that we want to see included in any one of the proposals that are accepted by the Bureau of Reclamation. So we're taking harder stances and making sure that we're included in those conversations. We know that as we work with the Upper Colorado River Commission, that we may not see eye to eye, but the tribes are going to ensure that we have a say, that we will be included one way or another in those in the negotiations as we move forward. It's our job as leaders to champion for our people and to ensure that our water is sustainable for the long term. Again, we want to ensure that we have a vote, that we are there, that we've been left out. You know, 10 out of 30 tribes within the basin have allocations up to almost 30% of the river. And for us to be left out it's not acceptable any longer. And so we're taking harder stances in ensuring that again. So with that, I want to encourage you to learn more about the tribes in your area, the indigenous people. You can use the QR code to get to our website. I want to also thank everyone for being here and listening to me, and I look forward to your questions because we had some good conversations last night, so we would like to get some questions answered for you. The way out.
Duteve. Buenos dias. Good morning. Lorelei taught me how to say good morning in Ute, so given that we're in Ute country, I thought it appropriate to start with that. I want to start by thanking the Southern Ute Tribe for hosting this. You've got a beautiful land that this is situated on, and this is a beautiful facility, and it looks like great participation. Thank you. I want to thank Steve Wolff, my tocayo. For any of you that might speak Spanish, tocayo means namesake. And he and I have an interesting relationship. You know, Steve, Estevan, that's namesake. Wolff is the base for López. It's the López. So we've got the same name. Finally, before I begin, I just want to apologize for my casual attire. You know, I've been traveling a lot, meeting with Colorado River users all over the southern U.S., but I seldom get to drive. This time I got to drive, so I had a garment bag set on my table, on my bed, and it's still sitting on my bed. So, anyway.
Look out there.
Yeah. Well, anyway. So, Steve asked us to talk about kind of tribal issues and the current status of the Colorado River. I want to start with some of the tribal issues. Thanks, Lorelei, for your little background. I thought that was really good. Within New Mexico, in the Upper Basin, we've got three tribes. We've got the Navajo Nation that covers most of the San Juan Basin in New Mexico. And thankfully, we've been able to settle their water rights within New Mexico. And that ends up being, between them and Jicarilla Apache, which is also settled, ends up being over half of the water that New Mexico has allocated to it. And then there's also a portion of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe that is in the very in the Four Corners area. There's no really big population base that I know of in there, but that is not yet settled, but we're working on that. I saw Chairman Hart walk in a little while ago, and I know that's really important to him, and it's important to us. We want to get that done, and I just want to mention that with regard to what Lorelei mentioned about the MOU that the Upper Colorado River Commission is entering into with the tribes. You know, and I think it was in August 22, and I think it was in this facility that we had our inaugural meeting with the tribes. We decided at the urging of the tribes, we decided it was high time that we should be having an ongoing dialogue with them. So we committed that we would try and visit each of the tribes within their homelands, and that we would alternate and meet. And we've been meeting now just about every two months for the last almost 2 years now. We started here. We've now been through, I think, all of the 6 Upper Basin tribes, or most of them anyway, and the states have also hosted some of those meetings. And you know, it's been a great dialogue. We haven't always agreed on things, but it's always been respectful. And you know, as Lorelei points out, the MOU is nothing more than kind of trying to institutionalize this ongoing discussion that needs to continue. It's not enough. As Lorelei points out, they don't have a seat at the table yet. And you know, if you think about it right now, the compact itself lays out the basis for the commission. To change that would require changing the legislation. Given the dynamics on this river right now, reopening that compact is, I think, not a good idea. But that doesn't mean we should not figure out other ways or keep working on improving the tribal inclusion in this dialogue. As I've said, in New Mexico, New Mexico's 3 Upper Basin tribes hold rights to more than half of what New Mexico has. So clearly they have an interest in this, without a doubt. We intend to keep working on it. So now I'm going to switch and start talking a little bit about the current status of things on the Colorado River itself. And I'm not going to talk a lot about what we've just been, this interim period, you know, where we were trying to figure out a way to get through from 2022, when we thought the system was going to just crash, till the end of the guideline period of 2026. I'm going to focus on what we're doing going forward, 2026 and beyond. So as you know, there's Reclamation has initiated a NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act, an environmental impact statement, to figure out how to operate the system after 2026, when the 2007 guidelines expire. And to do that, they've asked the states to propose alternatives that they might analyze and see if, you know, obviously the best solution is if all of the states came together and we had a brilliant and acceptable plan that everybody could live with, and you know, if it had inclusion by the tribes, and you know, that would make Reclamation's job easiest, and you know, that's what they asked us to try and accomplish. We met a number of times with our lower basin colleagues, that is the representatives from California, Arizona, and Nevada, to try and begin working on that. We came up with some concepts that we wanted to present to them. They presented some concepts to us. And you know, out of those first early meetings, we said, all right, well, you've done some thinking on this. Let us take what you've done, and we'll analyze it. We'll turn the knobs and kick the wheels and see how it works. Please do the same to what we've presented. Well, we did that with the concepts that the lower basin had presented it. I'm not sure that they did as much with ours, but that's neither here nor there at this point. But we, importantly, things kind of fell apart in terms of that ongoing discussion. And I won't say, you know, the stated reason, and I think there's definitely some truth to this. The lower basin had some very, very difficult issues to work through amongst themselves before they actually came and started talking to us. That is, they committed, first and foremost, and as near as I can tell, it's a solid commitment. We'll have to see about the details. But they've committed that they would own the structural deficit. To explain what the structural deficit is, the compact, the 1922 compact, didn't apportion water to each of the 7 states. Rather, the best they could do was decide, all right, they created a dividing line on the river at Lee's Ferry and said the upper basin which primarily is Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. Utah and New Mexico have small portions in the lower basin as well, but for all intents and purposes, our interests are mostly aligned with the upper basin. The upper basin will have use of up to 7.5 million acre feet per year. The lower basin on the main stem will also have 7.5 million acre feet per year. And by the way, I'm taking some liberties about the exact language of the compact. It also said that the lower basin had an additional 1 million acre feet, and that doesn't really say much more than that. But it's kind of a common understanding amongst all the state reps that was intended for uses on the lower basin tributaries. So the Gila River system, the Little Colorado, Bill Williams, all of those things, they should have gotten an extra million. So if we just set that extra million aside, there's a balance, at least on uses on the main stem, where the upper basin was supposed to get half of the available water, the lower basin half of the available water, and I'm still not getting to the part that there was some left aside to provide to Mexico. That treaty was entered in 1944. Mexico ended up getting 1.5 million. If you just do the arithmetic, and again, leaving the tributaries aside, 7.5, 15, and then Mexico gets 16.5 total. And then you pull in the tributaries, there's 17.5 that was doled out. And today the flow of the river is a lot closer to 12 million. So that really frames the problem that we're having to deal with. In 22, that came knocking at our door when the reservoirs were almost completely empty. And reclamation alerted us that very quickly we might not be able to generate hydropower anymore. Soon after that, we might not be able to get large flows through those big dams, through Glen Canyon Dam, and send down to Lake Mead. Well, now we've got to try and figure out a different way of doing things. So we took part of we took the concept that the lower basin had given us. We adapted it. The lower basin wanted to look at the content of 7 reservoirs, not only Mead and Powell, but the upper initial units in the Crisp and 2 main stem reservoirs down below Mead, and look at the content, combined content of all of those reservoirs as the trigger mechanism for shortages. We thought it didn't make sense. We thought it appropriate that whatever new set of guidelines going forward should be founded upon the law of the river, the compacts, the treaty, but also the authorizing legislation for the upper initial units, and all of the other things that comprise the law of the river. We thought it appropriate to look only at Mead and Powell. We continue to think that's appropriate. Anyway, we created an alternative that took that basic concept, adapted that concept, and said we will create a trigger mechanism for shortages But by the way, given that the lower basin, from this baseline of 7.5 and 7.5, the lower basin has been using well above that structural deficit that I talked about. They've committed to reducing their uses by 1.5 million. That is basically, at least in my mind, that's getting down to the compact baseline. Whereas we've never been able to get to our compact baseline because of hydrology and limitations in not having big reservoirs above our users. Our maximum use is on the order of 5.1 million acre feet. And that includes evaporation and system losses within ours. Part of the reason that the lower basin was using more than 7.5 is that they never accounted for evaporation and system losses in these huge reservoirs that they have. So now they've committed they'll do that. Well, in my mind, that gets us down to the baseline that they should have been operating at all along. So when we say we created a basis for triggering shortages, we've done that. But we think those shortages need to apply to the lower basin. We are well below our apportionment, and we suffer shortages every single year because of hydrology. So, that's one of the key elements to this. And importantly, another key thing about that trigger mechanism is we will look at the combined content of Mead and Powell on a date specific. That is on October 1st, so that we know how much water is available at the beginning of that water year. Everyone will know how much water they have to work with for the upcoming year then. There will be certainty in that regard. At least everyone in the lower basin will. We still don't have certainty in the upper basin. So the other element of our proposal is how will we release water from Lake Powell down to Lake Mead? That basically is going to be what is Lake Mead supplies the lower basin uses. So we, according to the compact, if you think about it, it says the compact says that we should send enough water down to meet their so that the lower basin has what they've been allowed under the compact. And I'm not going to get into the details of the arithmetic, but that and extra use is exactly what has drained the reservoirs today. So we set up a curve, a rule curve that says, based on the volumes of water in Lake Powell on October 1st again, we will decide how much water to send down to Lake Mead. And we basically said above 3,700 acre feet, that is where the reservoir is very healthy and almost spilling. Those releases will be dictated based on dam safety considerations. We don't want to create problems for ourselves. Below that, we've capped releases at 9 million acre feet, whereas before there was mechanisms that would allow significantly more. And then those releases drop down such that it slowly declines to 8.1 million, and then from 8.1 million declines down to where at 20% supply in Lake Powell, we will release 6 million acre feet. And then beyond that, that's as low as we go. We are not going to try and protect a certain elevation in Lake Powell. We think that's reclamation's obligation. And that's the essence of our proposal. It's relatively simple. But we've also said that that's what we want reclamation to analyze. So if you think about it, people will ask, and we have been asked, well, what are you guys doing? What's the upper basin doing in this crisis? Well, the activities that we will do are not within the EIS. We have said that we will do voluntary compensated conservation of upper basin water uses, things like what we're doing right now with System Conservation Pilot Project. But the volumes, unlike what we're doing right now, the volumes that we conserve, we'll store in a pool for our uses in critical times, to release when things are getting critical. The second thing that we'll do is, like we've done in the last 2 or 3 years, we will make water available if it's available in the upper reservoirs, like Flaming Gorge and Blue Mesa in the last couple of years. We will send some of that water down if things are getting critical in Lake Powell, to keep that intact. But those will be decisions that the upper basin will control as to when we make that water available. We want to make sure that we don't inadvertently allow for doing these things while the lower basin is not doing all of the things that it's committed to doing. So that's the essence of our proposal. We hope that that we will be able to, now that both the upper basin and lower basin have submitted proposals, we hope that we will be able to get back to the table and try and work towards a consensus. Importantly, the lower basin has asked us, well, you should at least commit to cap your uses going forward. And we have said we're not going to do that, in large part because of what Lorelei mentioned. We have significant quantified but undeveloped water rights, primarily for the tribes, that we have to allow for that to happen. And we recognize we are still going to be constrained by hydrology. So as that happens, we'll have to perhaps reallocate water within our states. But that is a right that we reserve for ourselves. We don't want that to be dictated to us by the lower basin. So the final thing I'll say, and then I'll sit down. All of this that I've described has not yet included a mention of Mexico in terms of what their participation will be. We believe that Mexico is willing to participate, but until such time as we actually have those discussions with them, we don't want to presume as to what level of participation will be. So some of those lower basin shortages, in my mind, likely will be picked up by Mexico. But that is yet to come. We've just recently, this last week, I went down to El Paso and presented our alternative to the Mexicans. We got some very insightful questions, but thankfully, I think we've thought it through and we had what I think are good answers to it. With that, I'll stop, and I too look forward to your questions once we have that opportunity.
The benefit of going last is I don't have to say much. So I too will start with thank yous. First and foremost, Steve, thank you for inviting me on this adventure. And I looked at this panel, and the answer was, of course, yes. And when you look at who I'm sitting up here with, the character of these people are something that is unmatched. And as I get the benefit of sitting next to Estevan in the difficult conversations and having him often teach me about how to be steady or calm, and I get the benefit of standing with Lorelei as we try to defend not only Colorado, but Colorado's, the tribes that reside within Colorado, the Ute Mountain Ute and the Southern Ute. So I want to start with a little bit on the tribal component and give a bit of my background. The two Utes in Colorado, the Southern Ute and the Ute Mountain Ute, both have settled tribal water rights that have not been fully actualized or realized or benefited from. And while those settlements come as a benefit to the state of Colorado because that is done, unlike New Mexico, we don't have to still go through that. What it does say is that they have water rights that they haven't been able to access. What it does say is that the federal government made promises that haven't been fully realized. And I think it's important that I say that because in just the last couple of years, payment has been made in the lower basin for water that much of it came from the upper basin. Payment is made for conservation for water that came from someone else. And so I think that's important to really feel, see, and hear, and acknowledge. And so I think we have a responsibility as we're talking about tribal water rights. And I think I want to tell you something that I've learned as we've sat in these conversations. The difference between ownership and a right to use. And Lorelei, as she talked about the ownership of land. And the different opinions on that. I think it reflects a bit on the different views between the upper basin and the lower basin. You don't own something first and foremost that is not there. We have an allocation. You cannot use something that is not there. And so I think reflecting a bit on the tribal views is important because there's a big difference between the view of entitlement. I mean, the root of that word, entitled, carries so much connotation, right? And I have 5 grown children at this point, and entitled is a word I used a lot. And you probably have too. And it's not positive in that circumstance, right? And you're not entitled to something that you don't work for. You're not entitled to something that is not there. And I think that's important. That is a lesson that I have learned from the tribe's stewardship across the entire upper basin. So I think starting out with that and my perspective as we go into the larger conversations is important. Getting on to the drama that Estevan talked about, I know that's what people want to hear about also is where we are on the Colorado River, where we are on these negotiations. These guidelines are set to expire, thank goodness. Thank goodness they are set to expire because we can learn. We can learn from a few things. One of the things that I think was important that we learned from the 07 guidelines was that, well, first and foremost, it's much easier to negotiate with full reservoirs. Yeah, it is much easier to negotiate when the reservoirs are full. It's also much easier to operate when the reservoirs are full. It's much easier to provide certainty when the reservoirs are full. A certainty that we don't have and never have and don't expect to have. We don't have that. And so Estevan mentioned and talked about this desire, this demand for certainty from the upper basin. We cannot provide a certainty that we don't have ourselves. And so when you hear the rhetoric come out, what is your number, upper basin? What can you provide for our certainty? Talk to somebody else because we don't have that certainty ourselves. Whatever your power is, that is where your certainty comes from. And so I think that's an important lesson learned. A thing I want to talk about in terms of another lesson learned is who we are as stewards of this river. And one of the lessons from the 07 guidelines was that it's commonly referred to as balancing. And It's a difficult one to describe because it doesn't seem to make sense, because it incentivizes some potentially bad behaviors. If you pull down mead, if you use more than what Mother Nature is telling you you should use, if you ignore red flags, then you get to pull down more from Powell and shift that problem upstream. You get to create your own problems, and then you get to hand those problems to your friends and neighbors upstream. It doesn't seem to make sense as I'm sitting up here. It would probably make sense if I was sitting down there, but thank goodness I'm not. And so when we talk about where we're sitting, Estevan mentioned hydrologic shortage. I think those words don't do justice to what we are experiencing and what needs to be acknowledged. First and foremost, we have not realized the compact apportionment. Should we be punished for that? No, that was not the intention of the compact. The intention of the compact was to preserve our ability to grow at a rate that we see fit, to preserve our ability to live within the means of the river and respond to it, to use more when it's available, but to respond when it is not. So we first have not realized that. Secondly, we have always lived within half of the river, main stem. Can anyone else in the basin say that? You have not used more than the half of the river provides on an annual basis. I don't think you can, unless you're in the upper basin. And then let's talk about the unsettled, or the settled but undeveloped tribal water rights. In the upper basin, that is more than 400,000 acre feet of water rights that are reserved. Like the compact, you develop at a pace that you see fit. You develop for your future generations in a way that makes sense for you. You develop on the lands of your ancestors in a way that honors Mother Nature, in a way that honors your culture. So then we get to hydrologic shortage. Those are just the foundational principles right there, right, of the numbers. But every year, some sort of shortage is taking place. We sat at a table last night and talked about a lot of these things. And we talked about hydrology because that's what water nerds do, right? And we talk about the snow and where it's sitting and, water equivalents and things like that. And we talked about how high it's sitting and what that means when it comes down and dust on snow. But we're sitting in an area that has been impacted and affected by the hydrology year after year. An area that is heavily focused on agriculture. That's a part of who we are, the fabric of who we are in this area of the state. And yet, this area specifically has suffered. I hate to say it because the other basins may get upset with me, but probably more than any other basin within the state of Colorado, or within the Colorado River Basin within the state of Colorado. And we're then ravaged by fires in the midst of that. And so an acknowledgement not only of compact, settled but undeveloped tribal water rights, half of the river, but an acknowledgement that on an annual basis, we are taking cuts because it is not there. And so when you hear the what more can you give, the economic drivers that are the lower basin, the powerhouse, the political powerhouse that is the lower basin, when you hear that, I cannot sit at those tables and not have the hydrologic shortage that is happening on a daily basis in the Colorado River Basin not be acknowledged. That is a flexibility that we've created flexible structures so that we can survive, so that we can still be here and still be Colorado, still be 4 Upper Basin states with 6 Upper Basin tribes. We've created those flexibilities to respond, and that should be acknowledged, not punished. And so I don't want to get too much into the detail of the proposal because Estevan already did, and because I think we have questions, but I want to talk about the time that we are in right now. Because it's critical. One of the reasons that we've gotten to the place that we are, and that there's an acknowledgement of the structural deficit, let's just call it evaporation, transit losses, science, physics, whatever you want to call it, that it is real, and it's what's happened. And so had that been acknowledged prior, we would not be in this situation. Everything that's been done thus far is legal based on these agreements. I want to make sure that I'm clear on that. But had we been realistic and used common sense, maybe these conferences wouldn't be so full because we wouldn't be in crisis all the time, right? Maybe I'd just be eating bonbons and watching soap operas or whatever. But that's not the situation that we're in. We are, like I mentioned and opened up with, this is much easier to negotiate when the reservoirs are full. We're not in that situation. A 30% full reservoir is not a healthy reservoir. And so one of the fundamental differences I have seen between the upper basin and the lower basin is the view on storage, the view on water. And I've seen much more comfort with keeping them low in the lower basin. They put the low in low reservoirs. But the comfort from the upper basin is preparing for that dry day. Because we know that's where certainty is. Certainty of what we can provide. Certainty of really fulfilling the essence of the compact, right? That comes with full reservoirs. Had that 1.5 been acknowledged, we wouldn't be having these conversations the way that we are. It was a nice to in 07. We'd like to get to it. There is absolutely no choice at this point but to acknowledge that. And like Estevan said, it's getting us into reality at this point, or the baseline. He always says things much nicer than I do. But it's acknowledging science. It doesn't even touch the climate change component at this point. It doesn't even touch the front lines that we are living on in the upper basin that respond to real-time hydrology. It's a start, but it's not the finish line, much like the work that we're doing with the tribes. This is the start, not the finish line. So as we talk about whatever the finish line is, now is the moment. If we go another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, allowing some form of status quo, we will never be able to protect ourselves. The tribes will never be able to fully develop if we let status quo go one more minute. And so this is the moment. So when we talk, we're sitting here in a conference that is about innovation. Oh, no. We're sitting here talking about innovation. We need to be thinking about a fundamental shift of how we look at this river. Up to this point, what I have seen is a demand-based operation. Operations driven based on wants and needs. And the shift that I believe is innovative is that dance with Mother Nature, innovating to a supply-based operation, responding to it quicker. That's what we think we have provided with our Upper Basin alternative. We've provided something that we consider common sense. We've provided something that rebuilds storage. Do you know why? Because that's how you get certainty. There's a benefit for everyone if we rebuild certainty. So I think that's what I would leave you with. This is the moment, and thanks for your support.
Thanks to all three of our panelists, and now it's your turn to ask them some questions. If you do have a question, 2 rules: please stand up so we can find you in the audience, and wait for the microphone to be in your hand. So I know there's got to be some questions out there. Mic up here. Coming to you. Thanks, Becky.
So first of all, I want to thank the 3 of you for protecting our livelihoods, protecting our economy, protecting our families. The work that you do is incredibly difficult, and we thank you for doing that for us. So, I want to ask a hydrology nerd kind of question. So we all see the news every day, and we see these incredible atmospheric rivers that fill the Sierra so full of snow that you can't even get to the ski area, much less enjoy the snow. I know that in California, where I have some family, there's the state of Northern California and the state of Southern California, and they don't always agree. But to what extent do some of these atmospheric rivers, I mean, some hit Southern California, provide some temporary relief? I mean, we know these are not permanent, but does that give you some opportunity, some time to work on these bigger, more difficult questions that you have?
Yeah, you can take it.
The atmospheric rivers that you're talking about, they certainly provide a respite, if you will. If you look at what happened in 2002, we were in dire straits. And then we had an incredible winter. And suddenly the pressure was off. You know, up until that winter, the states and reclamation had concluded that there was no choice but for the lower basin to reduce uses immediately. But then we got that incredible winter that took the pressure off. So it provided an opportunity, but I'm not sure that it was necessarily as helpful as we might have hoped. Keeping the pressure on then might have actually gotten us further down the road. The same is true right now. I mean, it's not exactly the same. These guidelines are expiring regardless. But if we get 2 or 3 years of very wet, very good winters, suddenly people begin to thinking, well, maybe we don't really need to do as much. The reality is staring us in the face. The climate has changed, and we can't expect those sorts of high flows for year after year after year. We've got to plan for something that will accommodate very, very low flows. So it provides a respite, but sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing.
Back of the room, there's a question. Hands up.
Hello, I also want to say thank you for the protection and just safeguarding what you're able to for our waters. The question that I have is, well, just a statement, an invitation for us all to remember that we are water, and that we all have the capacity and capability to consult our own waters as we look at these bigger issues in the world. But also wanted to just ask about the fracking and the oil and gas industry and the amounts of waters that they're taking, if there's any kind of attention and requests or acknowledgement as to what's being taken in that way from the waters of the people, and what that looks like, and if there is that conversation, what is being said.
I think as we understand the way that we operate within our individual states, we're obviously all dealing with our own administrative system. So prior appropriation, take it or leave it, it is one of our best protective mechanisms that we have. And so we very much protect that because it has protected us. And it creates the structure that allows us to modify our operations based on what's in the system. And so all of those conversations are being had, but what is also happening is understanding that we still grow as a state or still survive as a state, and so that is going to require us working together. And so there are examples of innovative agreements from different industries, structures, water users that figure out how to work together because we know that we need each other to survive. You cannot just have oil and gas and no agriculture, or agriculture and no recreation, agriculture and no environment, municipalities and recreation. Everybody has to figure out how to work together. And so I think we have structures here that do that.
Right here, Candace. And while the microphone's coming, I will just sort of respond a little bit to that. Is we tried to have a panel at this year's seminar looking at oil and gas, water use, and some of the innovation within that industry. We didn't get it pulled together, but maybe hopefully next year we can do that. So, okay, Candace.
Thanks. So this week and recently, the Rio Grande Compact has been in the news with the Supreme Court case. And there's a significant diversion, I think significant diversion from the San Juan to support the Rio Grande. But you don't hear about that diversion and the benefits to Texas coming off this tributary to the Colorado River. I don't hear that in the popular press anyway. Can you all maybe address, is that a significant diversion? And how does it factor into the Colorado River discussions?
Thank you for that question. What you're referring to is the San Juan Chama project that diverts water out of the rivers right near here, down through a tunnel under the Continental Divide and sends water into the Rio Chama and Rio Grande. First, to clear one thing up, Texas does not benefit from that. That entire allocation is part of New Mexico's apportionment of the Colorado River that we are able to divert in Colorado with constraints. And it is intended, and we do everything that we can to fully consume all of that water by the time it gets to Elephant Butte Reservoir, which is the start of where Texas gets its water supply. Importantly, some of it does get there, but we actually use that to, we exchange it upstream to manage the river system upstream of there. So Texas gets none of that water. In terms of how much water that is, it's on the order of, I think the contracted amounts, I'm probably not going to get this exactly right, but it's about 110,000 acre feet per year that could go through there. Since 2014, it's been shorted just about every year. And that is one of the examples that we point to year after year when talking to the lower basin about the reality of hydrologic shortages. The only reason it's being shorted is that the water is not available in those watersheds. I hope I've answered your question.
And I would only add that San Juan Chama is only one of the diversions out of the basically San Juan to the Rio Grande. There are 6 others that take water from the upper San Juan to the Rio Grande into Colorado, within the state of Colorado. So it's just one. Up here. Greg, you want to stand up so they can find you?
Thank you.
It's good.
Is it working? Oh, there we go. Okay. You know, as you talk about the structural deficit and you talk about things like evaporation and, you know, accounting for evaporation, accounting for loss, trying to get back to even, kind of as you described it, Estevan. You know, what, 55 years ago, I think, our legislature in Colorado formally acknowledged the connectivity between groundwater and surface water and the fact that they're really one system. And that may, in some ways, be dealt with in the compact in an indirect way as you just look at the arithmetic. But I'm curious if that connectivity, which I think is probably a significant piece of the difference between we see our snowpack and sort of snow water equivalent projections and then the reality of what actually ends up in Powell. I'm wondering if within the compact negotiations, groundwater usage and its effect on our ability to deliver, so to speak, and hydrology's ability to convert to actual lower basin use is being addressed, or if you're thinking about that.
You can, or I can, whatever. We're trying to address things, some indirectly, some directly. One of the benefits with the proposal that for modeling that we submitted was essentially that what's there is there, right? What makes it there makes it there. It also creates a boundary, recognizing that the entire basin is tied together through being within the Colorado River Basin, but also saying, hey, here's what's realistic to deliver based on what's showing up in Powell, because Powell is an indicator reservoir. So Powell will be telling you, Powell will be screaming what Mother Nature is trying to tell you and you haven't heard. And so when Powell is higher, releases will be higher. When Powell is lower, releases will be lower. But it also says, for those states that haven't acknowledged the groundwater, surface water interface the way that we have in Colorado, I'm not going to place judgment, but I am, you know what I'm saying, that you do you, but you only screw you. You don't get to like do that and be looking up, because we're just responding to Mother Nature. And so you should get your own house in order before you look to somebody else's house to feed you. And so that's what we're trying to do with our proposal, is say we each in our own states have some things to clean up, right? You're seeing legislation being passed with the non-functional turf. I'm really proud of the things that we're doing on the ground within Colorado. There is innovation happening in ag. When I go down to the lower basin and I say, have you heard about, or, you know, we're doing this Kernza study and this Silpham study, and they're like, what are those things? And I was like, wow, being so water short, you should know what those things are. But those are the things that we're doing to try to adapt to what's there. So the answer is yes, kind of, is the answer. Sorry, Greg.
Oops. Is this working? No.
Here you go.
I'd like to just add just a little bit to what Becky answered. New Mexico, like Colorado, also acknowledges, you know, that the two are connected. They're one and the same resource, right? So we, thankfully, I think the Upper Basin across the board, we do that accounting, and we make sure that our groundwater pumping is not impacting whatever deliveries we ought to be making. Importantly, if you look at what happens in Arizona, that's not true. Arizona looks at these as two separate resources. Thankfully, most of what happens in Arizona in that regard is not on the main stem, it's off on the tributaries. If you look at the Gila River system, there's huge amounts of groundwater that's being used and everything else but they're accounted separately. They accounted separately. You know, at some point they're going to have to pay the piper. Importantly, in California, but you know, it doesn't really end up impacting the Colorado River water uses. They also don't recognize that. They just passed a groundwater management act, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, that gave them 20 years to set up rules to try and come to grips with this. They're way behind the times on these things, but thankfully in the Upper Basin, we're on it.
So my prerogative, I get to ask the final question, and it's the really easy question with the really hard answer, and I would like short responses from all three of you, please. Do you believe all the sovereigns in the basin are going to find an agreement they can all get behind for the post-2026? and the second part is, if not, then what?
So for me, I think that's for me, all sovereigns also includes the 30 tribes within the basin. I think that ideally it's what we want. It's going to have harder conversations because what the tribes are doing in the upper basin is completely different than what the tribes do in the lower basin. Tribes have a better relationship with the states and the commissioners now within the upper basin. And so the relationship is based off of trust, and so trust is going to be a big component of that. And so I don't know how that's going to look in the lower basin. Upper basin is, I think we've done a good job in doing that, but I know that the lower basin and the upper basin have submitted their proposals, and again, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that it doesn't have a tribal component to either one of these. And we did submit our own document saying that there was some tribal principles that we want it to be adopted in either one of these components that are going to be considered by the Bureau of Reclamation, because the tribal component has got to be there in order for any part of the system to work and for the water to be sustainable for anybody within the basin.
That's a really tough question. I hope that we're able to come, you know, we're not going to like the solution across the board, but I hope we can at least get to grudging acceptance of something that works to get us along far enough. Some of the things that we're challenged to do are incredibly hard, and I think particularly in the lower basin, given how they've kind of grown beyond their means. Now they've got to come back within their means. I hope that we can come to that grudging acceptance, at least type consensus that includes all of those sovereigns, including Mexico and the tribes, because to do otherwise might lead us into litigation, and I think that is an awful outcome. It is the highest level of uncertainty that we'll get.
The short answer is I am hopeful. I think the right people are in place to make it happen, and I think one of the things that has been beneficial is the exampling that's happening in the Upper Basin with the Upper Basin States and the Upper Basin tribes. Lorelei mentioned the trust component, and I think it's important to acknowledge that where our success is going to be is not that we have gained trust, but the real hard work is that we keep trust. And so there was an acknowledgement that, and Lorelei mentioned this, that we, as the Upper Basin States proposal, didn't have a specific call out for tribal water rights in there, and there was an implicit component, and that just the common sense piece of our proposal was to acknowledge those tribal water rights and to have opportunity there. That being said, I think maybe we should have said it more explicitly, or said it in other documentation, or whatever that is, whatever that format is. And so I think on the smaller scale, it's that keeping of trust that's going to be critical in moving the needle forward in the Upper Basin, because I think we can change things. I think with the way that we are working together, I do think that we can shine a light on a better way to do things. And so with that leadership across the Upper Basin, I have hope that we can shine the light and find ways for us all to work together, recognizing that there is going to be significant amount of pain. We know what that pain feels like in the Upper Basin, and acknowledging that pain, that absolutely has to happen in the Lower Basin. Things have to be fixed. Things that, some of it may be simple. Things like ordered but not delivered out of Mead may be some really easy fixes. The evap and transit losses, the acknowledgement of that. Those kinds of things are steps forward, but our job right now is to not only talk about what we deal with on a daily basis, but to help shine a light. And to be a steward for not just the Colorado River on the north side, but to really say, how do we support Mexico? How do we support the Lower Basin tribes? But we can't do that without first supporting the Upper Basin tribes. We can't do that without first acknowledging the Upper Basin states' rights. So I'm hopeful.
Estevan, short of rebuttal.
No rebuttal. No, I'm breaking all of them. I just want to mention, Becky said something really important. She said, we've got the right people. I think we do, and I think we got the right people in both the Upper Basin and the Lower Basin. Not to say that we always get along, but two other things that are really important. I think we understand the nature of the problem. I think it's accepted as real. And secondly, every single one of the negotiators at this table has said they don't want litigation to be the outcome. So with that, I'm optimistic.
Thanks. And that'll be the first time Becky did not get the last word. Thanks for the panel.